Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Football.
99 yards and a half.
Are you ready for some football?
Nobody catches ball.
An amazing event. It makes what concerts look like tea parties.
The National Football League, like the National Basketball Association and Major League Baseball, has had a long history of racial exclusion. Integration of the NFL took place in two parts. African American players were initially integrated in 1919 and then expelled in 1926, with very few sporadically popping in and out of the league between 1927 and 1933. Frederick Fritz Douglass Pollard became the first African American player to enter the American Professional Football Association as a running back for the Akron Pros. Pollard was an exceptional talent, fast and elusive. He earned All-American honors as a halfback at Brown University and led the Bruins to their first and only Rose Bowl before he graduated. As the only black player playing in professional football, it was as much trying to survive as playing the sport. Pollard was quoted as saying, "Jackie Robinson had an easy time in comparison to me. I'd run out onto the field just before the whistle and they'd call me all the names in the world. At the kickoff, they'd come after me even if the ball wasn't kicked to me. I learned how to ball up on the ground to absorb the blows." Pollard said, "It was evident in my first year at Akron back in 1919 that they didn't want blacks in there getting that money. And here I was, playing and coaching and pulling down the highest salary in pro football." Pollard remained as consistent with Akron as he was at Brown, by leading the Pros to the league championship title in his second professional season. Pollard's legacy would continue as he went on to become the AFPA's first African American head coach. Pollard's move to coaching was an extraordinary accomplishment considering the racial preconceptions of the day. Those preconceptions, which still endure to some degree, presuppose his physical fortitude just as they presuppose his intellectual frailty. Pollard's accomplishments weren't enough for permanent integration, as only a handful of black players would play professionally between 1919 and 1933. Many of these players had only one-year careers and served primarily as tokens on their respective teams. Some of those outstanding players of that period included Paul Robinson, Duke Slater, Joe Lillard, Ray Kemp, and Bobby Marshall. When the Great Depression hit during the 30s, pro football was largely affected. Due to the scarcity of jobs, team owners conspired to keep African American players out and reserve them for white players only. In an interview, Ray Kemp, the last black player to be released in 1933 by the Pittsburgh Pirates, said, "It was my understanding that there was a gentleman's agreement in the league that there would be no more blacks." During the 1920s, Fritz Pollard had observed, fledgling NFL teams may have signed black players to gain recognition and fan support. Having gained popularity and stability during the 1930s, the league no longer was willing to sign black players. And during the Depression decade, it was bad public relations to hire blacks when so many whites were without jobs. Football owners, though, denied the existence of a racial bias. During the exclusion period of the 1930s, African American college football players were excelling, none more so than the UCLA's Kenny Washington, Woodrow Woody Wilson Strode, and Jackie Robinson. Washington and Strode attended UCLA in 1936, while Robinson, who was a year behind, would enter UCLA in 1937. Washington and Strode played together for 3 seasons. Washington was a talented running back and quarterback. Strode was defensive end, and Robinson competed in 4 sports: baseball, football, basketball, and track. Washington was the standout, who had tremendous speed, size, and strength. Washington and Strode were stars on Saturday, but they were ostracized during the rest of the week. In 1939, Washington led all college football players in total yardage with 1,370 yards. His performance would only earn him second-team All-American, which angered sports writers both black and white. When the NFL draft came around, despite setting UCLA records in career rushing and passing, he was ignored. NBC reporter Sam Balter blasted the NFL in an open letter, asking NFL owners why nobody chose the leading collegiate ground gainer of the 1939 season. Those who had seen him play agreed that he was not only the best football player on the Pacific Coast that season, but the best of the last 10 years. He continued by saying NFL scouts all ranked Washington as the best player in the nation, but none of them chose him. Other reporters spoke up about the injustices, but the ban was not lifted. In 1940, Washington and Strode would instead sign contracts to play for the semi-professional football team, the Hollywood Bears. Between 1934 and 1946, a new league had been formed, the All-American Football Conference. During the war years, two other players sprung on the college scene, Marion Motley and Bill Willis. Bill Willis attended Ohio University under head coach Paul Brown, while Marion Motley attended the University of Nevada, Reno. Willis played as an offensive lineman, while Motley was a 220-pound fullback. Willis and Motley were regarded as the best in their respective positions. World War II proved to be a major boon to the sport's integration. Not only did the war promote the ideals of democracy and fair play, it also gave blacks a chance to showcase their talents on college, semi-professional, and service teams. Because the NFL still had its popularity after World War II, the league decided to institute new teams. One of those teams, the Cleveland Browns, hired Ohio State coach Paul Brown as its head coach. In Washington, owner George Marshall of the Redskins was adamant about keeping the NFL segregated. Marshall was an influential owner who was responsible for many of the innovations that placed the game on a respectable footing. The black press and the civil rights groups like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the Congress of Racial Equality began putting pressure on the owners. Other organizations such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee also played a role in fighting racial barriers. The NAACP and the black press brought awareness on the lack of African American players in the NFL. They brought African American players together through the use of boycotts and picketing. They targeted the league's worst offender, the Washington Redskins owner, George Marshall. In Los Angeles, the Rams of the NFL, who recently transferred from Cleveland, and the Dons of the AAFC hoped to use the spacious municipal stadium. At a Coliseum meeting, three African American writers, Edward Robinson, Haley Harding, and Herman Hill, objected to the use of the Coliseum by any organization that practiced racial discrimination. Because the Coliseum was paid for by tax dollars, protesters believed that teams that practice discrimination shouldn't be able to use the facility. In 1946, the breakthrough came. To obtain the leases from the Coliseum commissions, the LA Rams agreed to sign the first African-American player, Kenny Washington. Woody Strode would sign with the Rams later in the year. Washington, at the age of 27, and Strode, who was 31, would have short careers in the NFL due to age and injuries. During the same year, Paul Brown of the Browns invited Bill Willis and Marion Motley to tryouts. From the moment he was appointed as head coach in 1945, Brown was determined to sign the best athlete regardless of color. Brown was aware of the unwritten black ban, but he had no intention of following. Brown would sign Willis and Motley. The black press considered the desegregation of professional football one of the top stories of 1946. Only the debut of Jackie Robinson with the Montreal Royals was regarded as more important in the sports field than the signing of Strode, Washington, Willis, and Motley. According to African-American sports writer Wendell Smith, Paul Brown automatically becomes one of the men of the year in sports because he voluntarily signed Motley and Willis. The Rams, on the other hand, are not to be congratulated with the same enthusiasm as Brown because they hired minority athletes under pressure. The four athletes became the face of reintegration in the NFL. Although NFL rosters revealed that complete integration had not been achieved yet in the late 1940s, African Americans were no longer on the outside. With the exception of the Detroit Lions, who signed two black players in 1948, NFL owners didn't pursue black players until the early 1950s. By 1952, all NFL teams had at least one black player on their rosters, with the exception of the Washington Redskins. It would take another 10 years, in 1962, before owner George Marshall was forced to sign black players. Interior Secretary Stuart Udall gave Marshall an ultimatum. Unless they signed black players, the government would evict them from the 30-year lease for the District of Columbia Stadium, which is paid for by government money. Willis and Motley would go on to have Hall of Fame careers. They demonstrated courage on and especially off the field. Today, African American players account for more than 68% of the players in the NFL. This was all possible because of Kenny Washington, Woody Strode, Bill Willis, and Marion Motley. Once they got their opportunity to play, they forever changed the landscape of professional football.
Being in the NFL does not separate black players from the threat of police subjectivity and violence. In many cases, this high standing provokes the use of abuse of power by authorities to remind athletes that not only are they not above the law, but they are not above second-class citizenship as a black male, no matter how successful they become. NFL players are notorious for run-ins with the law. The NFL consists of 66% black players, and these players are 10 times more likely to be arrested, accounting for 88% of total arrests. Sociologists account the disproportion to profiling similar to how black men are profiled in urban and poor communities. One instance with a player from the Cincinnati Bengals, Matthew Askew, while driving his Escalade. Askew is described as a big black man, was seen entering his car after being told he was illegally parked. The officer thought that he was attempting to avoid a ticket and stopped him in his car. A scuffle, which is described, occurred and the officers used a taser on Askew 4 times, alleging he resisted arrest. He was arrested, and the judge later rejected the account of the officers and cleared Askew of all charges brought against him. Ken Lawson, Askew's attorney, was quoted saying, "They tased him simply because he was a big black man, not because he did anything to make them fear for their safety." Other players in the league have spoken out against the profiling done by police to black athletes. Even though law enforcement continues to shrug off profiling as bad police work, Tennessee Titans wide receiver Kenny Britt has quite the resume to argue that fact. Mr. Britt has been arrested or faced charges on 4 different accounts for traffic stops, twice for license issues, once for alleged drunk driving, and once more for vague charge of eluding the police. These resulted in fines on 2 accounts and the acquittal of his DUI charge, and 1 license case was dismissed. 2 of his incidents took place in his home state of New Jersey, where state police were investigated in a 1990 scandal due to racial profiling in traffic stops. This scandal was not dissolved until 2009. Incidents like these, being pulled over and arrested and charged for being black, is a deterrent to these players. Kenny Britt has even said, "I don't bring my expensive cars to New Jersey anymore, all out of fear of being profiled for his color and status." When a black man is seen in a nice vehicle, law enforcement see one of 2 options. Either he is a ball player or a drug dealer. In the Cincinnati area, players are arrested at Over the Rhine on a regular basis because a young black man driving in a pimped-out Escalade in Cincinnati is going to draw major attention. The police are going to focus in on that vehicle as either being a drug dealer or a Bengal. There just aren't that many blacks in Cincinnati that can afford that vehicle, especially in Over the Rhine. And the league consisted of 70% black players and 29% white, compared to the 8% black and 59% white of the Major League Baseball. Just comparing the arrest of Bengals players to those of Cincinnati Reds players, racial bias plays a huge part. When players aren't being labeled by police as drug dealers and being arrested on minor charges, they face trouble in their own locker rooms despite being the majority. Veteran white player Richie Incognito was removed from the Miami Dolphins for bullying his rookie teammate Jonathan Martin during training camp, causing Martin to threaten to leave the team if Incognito remained on the roster. In a voicemail left on Martin's phone, Incognito was quoted saying, "Hey, what's up, you half-nigger piece of shit? I saw you on Twitter. You been training 10 weeks? I want to shit in your fucking mouth. I'm going to slap your fucking mouth. I'm going to slap your real mother across the face. Fuck you, you're still a rookie. I'll kill you." After this was released to the public, many Dolphins came to the defense of Incognito, dismissing the racial comments as locker room banter and not bullying or racism. However, Incognito was still dropped from the roster and is no longer a Miami Dolphin. Not every racial slur receives great backlash, however. In the case of Riley Cooper, wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, his status, publicity, and a new favoring head coach all played a role in keeping him as an Eagle. Riley Cooper was caught on video after an altercation with a black security guard saying, "I will fight every nigger here," in a drunken rage.
I will jump that fence and fight every nigger here, bro. Hold on.
After issuing a public apology, the team fined him an undisclosed amount. Black quarterback Michael Vick tweeted his support for Cooper's public apology and private apology to Vick personally. 2 years later, racist accusations were brought against the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, Chip Kelly, after former All-Star running back LaShawn McCoy and former coaching assistant Trot Thomas accused Kelly of getting rid of all his black players. This led to another incident when Kelly refused to match a free agent offer for Brandon Boykin, another black player, after Boykin had made a statement that Coach Kelly is uncomfortable around grown men of our culture. You see how fast he got rid of all the good players, especially all the good black players, McCoy told ESPN the magazine. He got rid of them the fastest. That's the truth. There's a reason. It's hard to explain with him, but there's a reason he got rid of all the black players, the good ones, like that. These statements don't go unwarranted. In just 2 seasons, Chip Kelly's rework of the Eagles locker room included trading Eagles all-time leading rusher and all-star McCoy for an injured linebacker and former Oregon Duck Kiko Alonso, cut 1,300-yard Pro Bowl receiver Deshaun Jackson, and refused to match free agent offer from the Chiefs for another Pro Bowl receiver in Jeremy Maclin. All 3 are black players. Kelly cut all these players after re-signing receiver Riley Cooper after his racist comments, investigation, and discipline. Seahawks cornerback Richard Sherman made similar accusations calling out Kelly as well, and Coach Chip Kelly continues to dismiss his actions as coaching decisions. The league has taken steps to reinforce itself as a diverse and accepting community by enforcing a new language foul for players and staff on the field. The new rule will make use of the N-word, an automatic 15-yard penalty with a second infraction resulting in ejection from the game. John Wooten, head of the committee, has said, "I will be totally shocked if the competition committee does not uphold us on what we are trying to do. We want this word to be policed from the parking lot to the equipment room, to the locker room, secretaries, PR people, whoever. We want to eliminate it completely and want it policed everywhere. This new rule will only affect racism and bigotry on the field, but expect fines and repercussions for other uses of racial slurs in locker rooms, press conferences, and extracurricular events." Mr. Sherman has spoken out against racism in the NFL on many platforms, including the new age language of racism and black profiling. In the post-game interview after the NFC Championship game against the San Francisco 49ers, he shouted down Michael Crabtree, celebrating his team in an aggressive manner.
Let's send you down to the field and Aaron Andrews.
Joe, thank you so much. Richard, let me ask you the final play. Take me through it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Who was talking about you?
Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best. Or I'm going to shut it for you real quick. LOB.
All right, and Joe, back over to you.
All right, well, we saw.
Social media and network television blew up, calling the outbursts unsportsmanlike and accusing Sherman of being a thug and a hoodlum for his unprofessional outbursts and aggression. However, Richard Sherman explained the real meaning behind the word thug describing black players in the league. The only reason it bothers me is because it seems like it's the accepted way of calling somebody the N-word nowadays. Everybody else says the N-word, and then they say thug, and they're like, okay, that's fine. That takes me back. It's kind of disappointing because they know. Sherman is not numb to these accusations of the label thug and what becomes of it because of his background and where he comes from. He grew up in the crime-riddled streets of Los Angeles, where he discovered football and went on to graduate from honors from one of the nation's top universities, Stanford. The title thug seems ill-fitting of someone of his character and accomplishments. You cannot be a dumb brute and play football at Stanford, but because of his appearance, the black skin, dreadlocks, and his passion for the game, particularly after his game-winning interception in the championship game to send his team to the Super Bowl, he is labeled a thug, the PC word for nigger. "I fought that my whole life coming from where I come from," he said. You hear Compton, you hear Watts, you hear things like that, you think thug. He's a gangster, he's this and the other. And then you hear Stanford and they're like, that doesn't make sense. That's an oxymoron. You fight it for so long to have it come back up and people start to use it again is frustrating.
Because they know what's the definition of a thug really. You know, can a guy on a football field just talking to people, you know, maybe I'm talking loudly and doing something, you know, talking like I'm not supposed to, but I'm not, you know, there was a hockey game where they didn't even play hockey. They just threw the puck aside and started fighting. I saw that and I said, oh man, I'm the thug? What's going on here? Jeez.
These days, 2 all-white hockey teams can drop the pucks and start an all-out brawl on the field, and it's for the love of the game. But when a black player shows his passion for making a great play to get his team to the Super Bowl, his color, appearance, and tone labels him a thug. The color barrier has taken many forms in the National Football League. Kids grew up knowing that black players are usually skill positions, running back, wide receivers, defensive backs, and white players are linemen, linebackers, and most importantly, the quarterback. Quarterback has long been a position dominated by white players due to the predispositions about black intelligence and labels placed on black athletes in general. One journalist who covered the NFL extensively admitted that on occasion, when certain team officials were considering a black quarterback, the red flags usually came down to a couple of things. He can't read defenses, and he can't grasp the terminology. Black quarterbacks are given significantly less time to mature at the position and are not brought up to speed the same as their white counterparts. Just as fast as they're thrown into the game, too many mistakes, and you're thrown right out. Former quarterback James Harris reflected on his career saying, "I held onto the ball a little too long, not wanting to throw an interception. And when I left the game, I knew I had never played up to my potential like I did when I played and just played. In the NFL, each interception meant my time might not be long." Ignorance, aggression, and black masculinity playing to the stereotypes brought onto black athletes, especially at the quarterback position. Some NFL owners and coaches merely do not want to see a black man as the face of a franchise, as well as the leader of a team because of racial bias. Black quarterbacks were presented as having natural ability or being an athlete who just so happened to be a quarterback. The idea that a black athlete was born with greatness and athleticism without having to work hard to get to his level, unlike his white counterparts. Commentators of the NFL and college games characterize black players as natural-born athletes, perpetuating this myth. A highly ranked white quarterback who played for a school in the Pac-10 conference was described by Sports Illustrated as not a big physical guy and not having a great gun, which was used to describe his lack of arm strength. However, that same quarterback prospect who was drafted in the top half of his first round in that year's class was described as a real student of the game and prides himself on his ability to read defenses and make smart decisions. Furthermore, Sports Illustrated predicted that the quarterback would be a guy on draft day that several teams will throw out the measurables and concentrate on the player. The same year, a black quarterback from a university located in the state of Florida was described by Sports Illustrated as the best physical specimen in this group, and if measurables make a quarterback, he is at the top of his class. He was also described as a big guy with a rifle arm, good mobility, good feet, and shows good overall toughness and a good feel for the game. Sports Illustrated, though, ended its description of the player with the following statement: "His biggest adjustment will be in the mental area, as he will face sophisticated NFL defenses, and his ability to learn a new system quickly and make the right decisions will be critical to his early success in NFL." The lack of successful black quarterbacks in the league has been connected to the lack of kids growing up wanting to be quarterbacks in black communities. This creates a domino effect. Young black players often choose positions based on the role model or player that they idolize. Black players tend to stick to more skilled positions. When black youth see few black quarterbacks at the professional level, it can be a deterrent to youth to learn to position themselves.
The position of quarterback takes the cerebral intelligence of the game. Peyton Manning, quarterback of the Denver Broncos, is seen by media and fans as one of the smartest players in the league. While he never had the best arm and was never the fastest, he still put up some of the most legendary stats, most likely due to his extensive understanding of the game. This same perception can be applied to NFL coaches who have been historically white. Bill Belichick, for example, has won 4 Super Bowls coaching the New England Patriots. While his teams were not always the fastest, strongest, or most athletic, they won because they were the best coached. What fans of the league fail to realize is that black NFL coaches, when given the chance, have also had a large amount of success. It must be no coincidence that Tony Dungy and Lovie Smith faced off in Super Bowl 41. Tony Dungy, now a pundit, has always been known for coaching Peyton Manning into the successful quarterback that he has become. Lovie Smith, on the other hand, is known for his defensive coaching abilities, coaching squads who, like the Patriots, maybe weren't always the most talented, but were mentally resilient. James Harris, former quarterback of the Bills, Rams, and Chargers during the 70s, was one of the first black quarterbacks in the NFL. Throughout his life, he faced the challenge of wondering whether he had a better chance as a skilled position player or a lineman than he did at quarterback. He is quoted in Art Russ' Illustrated History of the Black Athlete saying, "I don't know why there aren't more black quarterbacks in the league. Maybe the answer is that there are no black coaches and very few black general managers." This notion seems blatantly obvious, considering there are now 5 black starting quarterbacks in the NFL and 5 black head coaches in the NFL. James Harris also spoke about how black players who were quarterbacks in college often get transitioned to wide receivers and running backs when they join the NFL. Antoine Randall comes to mind, who played quarterback in college successfully, but was swiftly transitioned to a wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cases like this are almost endless. Eddie Robinson, who was James Harris's coach at Grambling State, was aware of his ability to turn Harris into a pro quarterback. He also understood that Harris had the ability to play other positions, but he wanted to prove a point. Robinson never let Harris be timed in the 40-yard dash. The quarterback could run a 4.6 40, and if any pro scouts found out, they would plan for Harris to be switched for receiver or defensive back. In 2014, we would see only the second black quarterback in history to win a Super Bowl in Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks. The first to do so was Doug Williams with the Washington Redskins almost 25 years prior. So what happened in those 25 years? Let's take Robert Griffin III, for example. A multidisciplined black quarterback who can throw from the pocket and also runs a 4.6 second 40-yard dash. Instead of utilizing his pocket presence, the Redskins offense, coached by Mike Shanahan, had him running the ball excessively, which eventually resulted in him being injured to the point where he lost his pace and could no longer perform. Andrew Luck, on the other hand, a white quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, similarly runs a 4.6 second 40-yard dash. However, Luck attempted roughly half the number of runs, 62, than RG3 did, 120. The hard evidence will show that there are very few black NFL quarterbacks in history that have been known for being successful pocket quarterbacks. This is likely due to the notion that black players are useless as pocket quarterbacks because it doesn't fully utilize their skill sets. While black quarterbacks in the NFL have become more popular in recent years, history will show that very few have been successful in the past. Even some of the biggest names in black quarterback history, like Warren Moon, Steve McNair, Fritz Pollard, and others, had to dodge positional changes. Warren Moon went undrafted into the NFL, largely due to the fact that he was a pocket quarterback and teams weren't convinced he could be successful doing just that. Moon overcame that adversity and established himself as one of the all-time great quarterbacks, black or white. Much like the position of quarterback, the position of head coach is seen as a cerebral role and one that black individuals couldn't cope with, despite their playing ability. The NFL has had a long history of a lack of African-American head coaches. Art Shell, a Hall of Fame offensive tackle, was appointed by Al Davis of the Los Angeles Raiders in October of 1989 to become the first African-American head coach in NFL history. When Shell was hired, he commented by saying, "I'm proud of it, but I'm also a Raider. I don't believe the color of my skin entered into this decision. I was chosen because Al Davis felt I was the right person at the right time. The significance in this is I am now the head coach of the Los Angeles Raiders." Some fans saw this as an historic event in the NFL, but others saw it as something that should have happened a long time ago. Being that the majority of the league is made up of black players, how could it have taken decades for one of those players to get a job as a coach? The NFL can be characterized by having a plantation mentality, where fields are run by white managers using black bodies ruthlessly to achieve success. Art Shell was inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player in 1989, the year he became a head coach, and went on to receive NFL Coach of the Year in 1990 with the LA Raiders. His groundbreaking achievements would convince both white and black fans of the NFL that skin color doesn't constitute managerial ability, but it would take a long time for someone like Art Shell to be seen as a norm and not just an exception, much like Warren Moon, who is seen as an outlier of success. To this day, the strong majority of coaches in the NFL are white. To satisfy diversity issues with coaching and front office positions in the NFL, the league implemented what we know as the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule is named after Pittsburgh Steelers owner Dan Rooney, who joined with Roger Goodell in 2003 to influence an increase of minority representation in managerial positions. According to the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sports 2003 report, the percentage of black players in the NFL stands at about 70%, a figure that has slightly fluctuated over the last few decades. But in 2002, there were just 2 black NFL head coaches, Tony Dungy of the Indianapolis Colts and Herman Edwards of the New York Jets. For the NFL, it was time that the number of black coaches started representing the number of black players. The Rooney Rule requires that a franchise must interview at least one minority individual for each open role. In 2007, Super Bowl 41 featured Dungy, joined by Lovie Smith of the Chicago Bears, to establish not only the first Super Bowl with a black head coach, but the first Super Bowl with 2 black head coaches facing one another. Tony Dungy, with the help of legendary quarterback Peyton Manning, came out on top. Lovie Smith now coaches the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Much debate has been held over whether the Rooney Rule is really effective. Charles Ogletree, a professor of law at Harvard University and the founder of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice, suggests that while the rule is important, it has discrepancies. He is quoted saying, "There is a big difference between interviewing and hiring. There has just been too little effort in that regard. There needs to be more hiring in a significant way, and not just because they are black, but because they are talented and do well when they get those jobs." Todd Bowles was interviewed for 6 separate NFL head coaching positions before being hired as the New York Jets head coach in 2015. He was required to report to NFL reps following each interview to make sure there were no racially charged reasons for why he did or did not get the job, which is something that white candidates presumably did not have to do. There are currently 5 African American head coaches in the NFL, including Bowles, Lovie Smith, Marvin Lewis, Jim Caldwell, and Mike Tomlin. As for top managerial positions, there are 0 African Americans in CEO roles and only 7 minorities with the position of general manager. While Tony Dungy is famous for being one of the all-time great head coaches, perhaps the best example of what the future holds is Mike Tomlin, head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. While Tomlin never played in the NFL, he was hired at age 34 and later became the youngest coach in history to win a Super Bowl. Tomlin's standing record in the NFL is 93-52, which gives him a win percentage of .641, just shy of legendary coach Don Shula's .676. Tomlin is proof that skin color and head coaching success has no real connection. He is also proof that it doesn't take a tenured NFL player to become a tenured NFL coach. Patrick B. Miller, author of Sport in the Color Line, suggests that Western tradition renders black physicality as a kind of compensation for the absence of cerebral qualities and the traits of a purportedly advanced or advancing culture. Western tradition has clearly rubbed off in the NFL, being that the majority of players are black due to their physical advantage over white players, and being that the majority of coaches are white due to their so-called cerebral advantage over black coaches. But how can we measure this without real opportunity? From the limited information we have since black NFL head coaches have become more of a regular reality, there's nothing that suggests that black head coaches would be any less successful than white head coaches. In a league where it is near impossible to retain a head coaching job without statistical success, 2 of the 6 longest tenured head coaches are African American. Marvin Lewis of the Cincinnati Bengals has been employed since 2003 and has never been fired as a head coach. Mike Tomlin has been employed since 2007 and has also never been fired as a head coach. In the future, Coaches like Tomlin and Marvin Lewis and quarterbacks like Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, and Super Bowl champion Russell Wilson will likely further prove that black individuals have both the talent and the cerebral ability to be successful. Whether or not this will change the minds of owners and fans of the NFL is up to question.